Welcome to IQ HitList. I'm Vishwa Sadashivan. IQ HitList is Inconvenient Questions one-on-one interview that explores the views of an individual that you want to see. My guest today threw away a decade's worth of a successful legal career to become a prominent and influential housewife. Now, why would an intelligent, seemingly sane person do that? Is it to be a tai-tai? Is it because she hated legal practice? Is she lazy? Doesn't seem so, because she's busier now than ever before as a full-time volunteer. You see, beneath the calm, angelic exterior manifestation lies a feisty fighter of causes who deftly combines head, heart and gut to achieve results. So, what are some of her chosen battles in the last 20 years? Urban poverty, hospice care, and topping the list, mental health, all issues that are conveniently hidden away from the public sphere, issues riddled with inconvenient questions. She's also been a leading proponent of the family as, to quote her, cornerstone of stability and resilience. So, why is this paikia in designer clothes, or doing whatever she does? Who is she? And I have been warned that she's armed and dangerous. Anita, welcome to HitList.
Thank you, I think, Vishwa. I'm a paragon of virtue.
Absolutely.
You should know that. Yeah.
And your nose is getting longer. So what's cooking? Right?
I love cooking Indian
How come?
food. My roots are in that. That's what interesting, isn't it? It's because I went for cooking classes, and the first lot of cooking classes I went for were Indian cooking classes. So those are my roots.
So what kind of Indian dishes do you
I
cook?
do northern, I do southern.
I heard your guru was Darshini.
That's right. Shini's...
She's a scream, isn't she?
Oh, she's wonderful. So Shini is my inspiration, and she's the one who got me set on this track. And you know, it was a total coincidence, because this is before I met my husband at King. Didn't realize that Shini knew him as well.
Is it why he fell in love with you?
Oh, because of the food?
Food?
Probably.
That
probably.
can't be any other reason, right? So, I mean, you have so much of volunteer work. I mean, you are, let me just read out some of the things that you've done, right? You're chair, Marriage Central Advisory Board. You were the chair from 2008 to 2013. Co-chair, Community Silver Trust Evaluation Panel. Vice President of Asian Women's Welfare Association. Deputy Chairman, Assisi Hospice. Board member of Enabling Master Plan Implementation Committee, IMH, National Family Council, National Healthcare Group, Singapore International Foundation, St. Andrew's Autism Center and Autism School.
There are a few others you left out, actually,
Yeah.
but never mind.
And you cook.
Yes.
So how do you connect all these things as well as be a wonderful homemaker?
You know,
Is it all linked?
I'm doing all the things that make me happy. There are different aspects of my life. I think family comes first, no matter what. So in as much as I'm not crazy about other people's children, I'm kind of crazy about my own. But if you handed me someone else's child and someone else's puppy, it's obvious that I'd go for the puppy rather than the child. But with my own kids, yeah, my husband and kids come first. And I think what I do nowadays gives me the option to really prioritize more easily, that they come first and the other things which matter to me come after that. But because they're in school most of the time, it gives me a little more time to do the other things which I'm interested in.
Yeah. And two things are very central from what I've seen, you know, in what you do, in where you spend your time. And one is clearly the family. You've been a great advocate of spending time with family, right? Because you believe it's a cornerstone, right? On the other hand, you also believe very much that people with mental illnesses need to be better understood.
Yep.
In fact, the whole phenomenon of mental illness needs to be better understood. You know, could you share with us a little bit more about why, and clearly in your case, the two have come together, right? In the case of your mom.
It has. I mean, first of all, I was going to share a little bit how I got into this. I think I'm 52 this year, and it was when I turned 50 that I really started thinking about what did I want to do with the second half of my life. And mental health was a thing that came up. And since then, so it hasn't been too long that I've been involved in mental health, even though I've been sitting on the IMH Institutional Committee for quite a number of years, for 6 years. That gave me a fairly good sort of background to what's happening in the landscape around me in Singapore. But in terms of the personal thing, it was only when I was 50 that I decided that this was one of the areas that I was going to focus on in the second half of my life. And looking back over the last 2 decades, I then realized that actually I was being prepared on a more personal level. With both my parents. With my mom now, she has Alzheimer's. She's probably late stage Alzheimer's, which is something that we didn't discover until fairly recently. She's 89, so I just assumed, the memory loss that she had last year was just a very natural part of the aging process. But it's become more and more evident through the last few months, because now she sees me as her sister. I'm no longer her daughter. I'm her favorite sister. And that was my favorite aunt. So that gives me a little bit of comfort. But my mother has had a history of depression and anxiety. And now, coupled with Alzheimer's, it has brought mental health very, very close to the doorstep of our home, right inside our home. And it's not only my mom, my father has had a history of depression as well. And then I realized, because in those days when he was first diagnosed, the reaction of the family was, don't let anyone know.
No.
And I was 18. I was 18 when my dad had his first encounter with depression, and he confided in me, clinical depression. And it was when he retired from his first job. These things happen when there's a big drastic change. And so when he retired from his first job, he plunged into this situation. And that time I was told, don't tell anyone about it. And I was petrified, and I was sitting for my A-levels. And that was the secret I kept with me. And it was terrible because I didn't know who to turn to, what to do with it. Thankfully, my dad turned to medical treatment. And within 6 months, he was fine. But that time was a dark time, and it's happened over and over again through the years. Whenever there was something major, when he retired at the age of 81 from FNN, it plunged him into clinical depression again. By that time, I'd seen it happen with my mom, I'd seen it happen with my dad. My first instinct was, we got to get you to the doctor as soon as possible. Because with things like depression, clinical depression, which is just really a chemical imbalance, all you need is medication. Getting the right type of medication.
To at least keep it.
To really, and it takes some time to kick in.
Yeah.
You don't see anything happening for about 5 or 6 weeks. And then all of a sudden, just like that, you feel as if the lights have turned on for the person.
And I believe this is a key reason also why you feel that the family as a unit needs to be the first line of defense.
Family is everything.
Everything, right?
Everything.
Like this again goes back to your experience.
Yeah.
Right? And there needs to be that openness, And I guess extending from that, there are so many people who don't have family support.
I think it's several things.
Yeah.
One is family support. The other thing is, I think even with mental illness, there's so much stigma attached to it when there shouldn't be. If we were less shy, less conscious about sharing about these things, because, a recent mental health study in Singapore shows that at least 1 in 10 Singaporeans will experience mental illness in one way or another in their lifetime.
Yeah.
That's you and me.
Yeah.
At some stage, we may experience it, but we may not even recognize it. So it's so important, I feel, to create and enhance their awareness amongst everyone that, first of all, mental illness is everywhere. When we see it, we shouldn't be scared of it. If we see it, we should learn how to recognize it.
Yep.
And we should know how to support it.
I just came back from an overseas conference, a UNESCO conference actually, where we were dealing with, it was on the rights of the disabled persons, right, on the 3rd of December in Paris. And I chaired a panel discussion, and one of the things that came through was beyond international policies and conventions and domestic public policy, at the end of the day, the biggest impediment to dealing with rights of the disabled is actually the family.
Yes.
Because quite often, it's that even though there's help out there, it's the family members who do not want people to know that there's a disabled person at home.
That's right.
It could be superstition, it could be taboo, It could be all kinds of things. But the problem is, if you are not prepared to first acknowledge that you have a problem,
True.
and that problem is not to be ashamed of, you're not going to begin to find therapy,
Yeah.
find solution. So what have been some of the things that you were involved in? For example, in the sphere of mental health, in advocacy, for example.
One of the things that I'm really involved in is highlighting the role of caregivers for persons with mental illness, because they're key. And we need to look after and support these caregivers as much as we need to look after and support the person with mental illness. Most times we forget about the caregiver.
Yeah.
They're invisible, but we don't realize that they're the ones facing and bearing the brunt of the pressure and the hell that people can go through when they're going through this illness, this darkness. So if we can support the caregiver better, if we can highlight what mental illness is all about, I think there's sort of a greater sort of safety in numbers, so to speak. So rather than a person who's going through this feeling so alone, rather than a family feeling that they're isolated in a situation like that there are many, many others in that situation. So one of the organizations I'm involved with, and so the fairly new charity called Caregivers Alliance,
Yep.
supports persons with caregivers of persons with mental illness. The beauty of this sort of program is a peer support program. They're being supported and trained by other caregivers of persons with mental illness. So they're being supported and trained by people who have walked down that road before, who have understood what one's going through.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for families and for persons who are ill, that they know that they're not alone in this. Because when you're going through it, you think you're the only one who is going through that there's no one there who's prepared to understand what you're going through. But once you realize that actually there are lots of people around who are in that same situation,
Yep.
all of
Yep.
a sudden, first of all, it's easier to talk about. It's easier to share. And I think once you start talking about the problem that you have, a problem shared is diluted. All of a sudden, you can get fresh input from other people. There is the beauty of having that support. And same thing, I think we make the effort in our families to just to talk about these things more openly. Even though at first it might be difficult for your fellow family members to face it and
Yeah.
talk about it,
Yeah.
in time you're just breaking down all those walls of whatever it may be. It may be stigma, it may be fear, it might be just families who are just not used to talking about these things.
So, I guess my question is, how far have we come in the last 5-10 years in this area? In getting people to first acknowledge that we don't have to be embarrassed. There's help. Seek it. I mean, that's the message, right?
Yeah.
See, you can have help, but you may not be willing to seek it. Right? Face. How far have you come, Anita, in the last 5-10 years?
I think it's still early days, Vishwa. I think we are a little more open now than we were before. But if you look at the way disability has evolved in Singapore, in 20 years ago, there was very little done. 10 years, there was more. And I tell you, with the ASEAN Para Games,
Yes.
recently, with the spotlight on it, all of a sudden I think the perception of the public has changed. They realize that these guys can do far more than they ever thought they could. And media has to help. I think in the area of persons with mental illness, we're still at that stage where people think, first of all, you've got a mental illness, you're dangerous.
Yep.
I got to stay clear from you. Not realizing that medication can help, support can help. A recent mental health study showed that 90% of people think that people with mental illnesses can get better by themselves. But that's not so. I mean, we need to see it like any other illness, that you need to go to the doctor and get treatment.
And treatment and medication.
So once we change that, and I think a lot more advocacy, a lot more awareness has to come from that. And this is where I think the role of the media has such a large part to play. Because there may be stories, but I think an example of the last few days with the ASEAN Para Games, the amount of media and attention that was focused on it, I think that has done far more than perhaps the advocacy work in the last 5 years for disability. And if we had a similar thing for the mental health arena, I think mindset will change. If you look at it, most of the stories which are highlighted in the papers are are tragic stories.
Yeah.
It's people who have not received treatment,
Yeah.
who have lost control.
But we need a lot more success stories.
Absolutely.
Right. And I wouldn't play down, even though I agree with you about the role of the media, I wouldn't play down the role of advocates. And this is where I feel Singapore needs a lot more established people, influencers,
Yes.
such as you, such as me perhaps, to enter the fray.
Yeah.
We can't say this is not our problem.
Yeah.
This should be our responsibility and our way of giving back, right? IQ is committed to doing that. We don't have to do it, but we are doing that. You didn't have to do the things that you're doing, but you're doing it. And I think a lot more of us who've had the opportunity of a good life,
Yeah.
we owe it to society, we owe it to ourselves to actually do a lot more.
I
So
agree
what do
with
you
you.
think is going forward? What would you like to see in the sphere of advocacy?
I think people stepping out of the shadows and telling their stories. I'm doing it on behalf of my father. I've waited for him to pass away before sharing his story, but I think
Yeah.
he
Because
was
he was
looking
a
down.
public
He
figure.
was a public figure.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to, if you think about it, embarrass him in any
Yes,
way.
yes.
But thinking about it, I think he would be pleased with what I'm doing to show that someone like him, like anyone else, he had these monsters in his life.
From an early stage.
Early stage. And, it's like any illness. You take some time out to recover, and then you get on your feet again, and you're like anyone else.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Anita. I'm very proud to call you a friend.
Ditto.
Thank you. That was Anita Fam, a wonderful human being. And this has been IQ HitList. Log in to our website, www.iq.sg, to watch what our next HitList guest is, or HitList interview is. Click the links to see other guests who have appeared on our previous episodes. Post your comments on social media and let us know if there's someone you would like us to interview on HitList.